Hi, I'm MJ, and welcome to the Frontify podcast, where we check the pulse from the world of brand, marketing, and creative. Today, we are joined by Scott Brinker, VP of Platform Ecosystems at HubSpot, and also widely seen as the godfather of Martech. Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Oh, thank you, MJ. It's delighted to be here with you.
Amazing. So happy to have you with us, Scott. I think most of our listeners actually have a pretty broad understanding of Martech, but since the term and the landscape is continuously evolving, what is Martech for you today, and also like how has it changed over time?
When people hear about Martech, most of the time, we think about the big names like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, well, what am I using for my CRM? What am I using for my marketing automation platform? But the truth is, there's this incredible long tail of all these specialized pieces of software out there. I mean, as Mark Andreessen said like a decade ago, right? Like software is eating the world. And so you think about the plugins that you use in
Mm.
Chrome to be able to capture the screenshots that you plug into your content marketing pieces. Does that plugin constitute Martech? Well, I don't know. I'm using it to create really awesome content marketing. Um, so that's one of the reasons why the landscape has always been a challenge. Is just
Mm.
the boundaries are very fuzzy.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's actually a view that I never had on the topic, specifically all these erasing platforms that then again kind of enable additional applications to interconnect even in areas where we wouldn't have assumed it. But one question there is kind of, there lies a lot of importance in just like that word landscape and the interconnectivity of all these apps. And I've seen you in one of the past talks that you have given talking about the power of ecosystems, the power of marketplaces, and also like the power of networks. So maybe you can give us there also like a little bit of context what this means for what you've just described, but also then these three pillars basically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I've become so passionate about platforms and ecosystems is actually entirely from my work on that crazy Martech landscape. Is over the years as that blossomed into literally thousands of apps that we were tracking. And by no means was that the entire universe. That was just the ones we could find and categorize. And every year when I publish that, I instantly hear from all these other great companies that somehow we missed. So anyway, so this landscape of all these different innovations. I mean, at some level, as a marketer, this should be a wonderful thing, right? I mean, you've
Mm.
got all these companies who are putting, their minds and their money to coming up with better capabilities to help you succeed. But because all of these different innovations, they kind of grew up in their own little spaces. I mean, this wasn't like this Martech, landscape was created around, like in the case of like, Apple and iOS, like, okay, well, everything that all the millions of apps that got built, up for the iPhone, they were kind of all built around a platform to begin with. So they were all interoperable and it was very clean and easy. In Martech, you had all these innovations, but there wasn't really this common foundation that they all mapped to. And so it became a burden really on the shoulders of marketers to say like, okay, yes, we can pull technologies from all these innovative companies, but how do we get them to work together? How do we make sure that the data is passing here? How do we make sure that the workflow is coherent, that there aren't things that are dropping in between the middle? And that's been a source of frustration for marketers over the past few years. I'm a passionate believer that this is something that the software companies in the marketing industry, it should be on our shoulders to solve this. And we can solve this by having more open platforms, by prioritizing integration as something that we treat as a first class citizen in our product roadmaps, and that we take on the responsibility of making sure that these things interoperate, so that marketers, they can focus on the capabilities they want, and not spend as much time worrying about like network engineering of like, okay, what's the REST API I should, like be calling from this one to this other one. That's, you know, division of responsibilities in the way they should be.
It's interesting that you talk about these topics because I see it from two different lenses. The first one is basically me joining the company when we were 15 people. Now we're above 200, and I think like in a similar proportion our tech stack also exploded, like the entire Martech stack. And I think like one of the first things that I usually check is there an integration? Is there an API that we can leverage? Does it integrate in our current tech stack? And I think that's really crucial, and also why we also launched our own API and ecosystem, because I think that's just like the way forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, like if I think about 4 years ago, in many ways, this was a much bigger problem then because most of the major platforms were still pretty weak, on even seeing the benefit of a platform ecosystem. Most innovators, like, yeah, it just wasn't prioritized very
Mm.
highly in any one product roadmap. And I think over the past 4 years, one of the beautiful things about capitalism is like the incentives that are given to us from customers, that they end up working. And so as customers have just increasingly made demands that the MarTech vendors have to be interoperable, that they have to be able to connect together. Yeah, the industry's made great progress. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still think we've got further to go. We are nowhere at the point where it's as easy as taking
Mm.
an app from the App Store to your iPhone. But we're headed in the right direction. I'm very encouraged by
Mm.
that.
And I think if I understood you correctly, it's also like tackling the topic from a very strategic level. And you said product roadmap, but also like from a marketing strategy point of view. Like where would you see the interlink there? Like how much of a role should Martech and Ops play in today's role of a VP marketing or a CMO in regards to their strategy as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, there's a temptation to say that strategy should precede technology, right? I think particularly more senior executives have the instinct that like, listen, we don't want to just buy some technology and then figure out what strategy we can come up, to use it. What we want to do is we want to be very intentional about what our strategy is,
Mhm.
and then make sure we're developing the right capabilities with internal or external technologies to achieve that. And for the most part, I agree. I think that's the primary way to look at it. But there's a caveat I would put there, which is we are living in an age where technology itself is advancing
Mm.
so rapidly. Not just the technology that we use, internally, for our own operations, but the technology out in the consumer world. I mean, just the expectations, that consumers and customers have of the kinds of digital experiences they can, they expect from the companies they do business with, that's just changing and evolving so rapidly that I do feel you need a certain mechanism, a feedback mechanism in your organization to be able to keep an ear to the ground of these new technological innovations and to invest a little bit of time, don't go overboard, but a little bit of time in just experimenting with these new things as they come up, because very often those become the seeds for new strategic opportunities. And so if you can think of it as, not just, one way or the other, but it's a little bit of a, yeah, two-way exchange of
Mm.
strategy and technical possibilities. I think that's the best of both worlds.
Mm. And I love the feedback and kind of the running service part that you mentioned there indirectly, because in the end I think through and you mentioned this in one of the former talks, right? Through technology and automation we can almost do everything, which doesn't mean that it's necessarily like creating great brand experiences or great marketing experiences. On the contrary, and I think it's not a stretch for us to say like we have all experienced really bad experiences when it comes to that. So what's your take on there? Like when does automation and technology does the opposite that it actually was supposed to do, and how can you navigate that?
Yeah, I really do believe this is the biggest challenge we're facing right now. In fact, yeah, I've just recently been doing a lot of writing and speaking about a concept where I feel like, okay, everyone's heard about big data.
Mm.
And I think, over the past decade or so, right, that was kind of one of the big missions was, oh, okay, all this data, how do we collect it? How do we make sure it's stored? How do we start to do analytics on it? And so that's kind of been a mind frame of like, oh, big data, that's the, major technology challenge to overcome. I think we're actually at a point where we've kind of overcome that.
Mm,
I mean, at this point now, we've got the data and we've got it at scale and it's in the cloud. And I mean, if you look at like the data ops ecosystem, I mean, it's just very rich. Like we're getting very mature, on a just data layer.
mm,
But sort of the next layer above that is what we do with that data, how we actually action on it, not just do analysis on the data, but actually use it to feed into either the workflow of our internal operations, or the experiences that we're delivering customers. And so I've been calling this big ops, like a layer on top of big data that's, again, like what we're actually doing with it. And I think of it as big ops because it's not that you just have a single master workflow or that we have a single master app that's running all this stuff. We have this incredible proliferation of all these different automations that are happening all throughout our business, all these different little agents that we're running, these apps that we're running. As you have citizen developers who are increasingly able to like build more and more little, automations or workflows or mini apps on their own, it's this incredible explosion of activity at the next layer up. And on one level, this is amazing, right? This is incredible. I mean, the amount of innovation this has the potential to unlock in organizations is mind blowing. But there's another side to this, which is how do we manage this? How do we govern this? I mean,
mm.
just the amount of activity, that's happening through all these. And like, I think to answer your question specifically, this is now one of the challenges with automations is we have so many of them in so many different little pieces throughout our organization that sometimes it's actually quite hard today to see the system dynamics of how all these pieces fit together. And so even if a particular automation is working really well in the narrow context in which it's applied, how does that automation either get affected by other ops and automations that
Mm.
are happening upstream, or for that matter, how does its activities, have implications for other apps and automations, running downstream? I think this is something, I mean, we could do a whole hour just on this topic, but
Absolutely agree.
there's a lot of innovation happening around that space, but it is a really big challenge. I think this is the challenge of this decade for us.
Mm. I guess like every challenge comes with huge opportunities, right? And so the question is basically I mean, it's a huge complexity. It's a huge, I think, also endeavor as a company to build up the people, the technology, etc., the systems to make it work. But how would you then like ultimately quantify and qualify, I think, the impact and that it has on a company? Because yes, it's added complexity and the benefits seem to be pretty clear, but how would you say is kind of how would you measure the impact of like having a decent Martech stack in a company?
Yeah, that's a great question because measuring ROI, I mean, marketing is one of these fascinating disciplines that has both ends of the spectrum. Like, there are certain activities you do in marketing that have just incredibly accurate ways of measuring their efficacy, right? I
Mm.
mean, like, classic example of this would be like, paid search engine marketing. Like we can really
General
like get
performance.
this down to a
Mm.
science. We spend this much, we get these many leads, we've been able to follow through on like the conversion rate of those. I mean, it really is very much a science, and you can allocate budgets, accordingly. But we also have technologies in marketing that are on the other end of the spectrum where they are more almost like infrastructure, fundamental capabilities. And maybe like as a great example, think for a moment about the tool you're using for project management inside your marketing organization. Maybe you're using Monday or Asana or Basecamp or whatever your tool of choice there is. How do you measure the ROI of that tool? Well, I mean, this is helping us be more productive, and it's getting, make sure we're spending time on the right priorities and the loading and things aren't getting, I mean, it's clear it's got value, but trying to like quantify down to like, oh, well, is this exact per seat license, for this tool? how do we know this is actually paying off? It gets really tricky. And so Martech is this weird
Mm,
spectrum of things that have more or less attribution to them. And so I don't know. One of the ways, like, a Gartner or a Forrester or someone like that would probably try and oversimplify this is to say, listen, providing attribution to individual tools can start to get really challenging. But overall, you can say like, okay, well, what's the efficacy of the marketing department as a whole? Like it has a certain set of targets, it has a certain set of expenses. We're now able to benchmark those expenses against, a pretty wide range of peers, through all these analyst firms, for the amount we are spending collectively on our MarTech stack relative to the collective performance we are achieving,
mm.
as a marketing organization and a company, is it good? Like you can get that level, but yeah, once you're trying to get down into the individual tools, it gets hard.
Mm. And it's on one point from our perspective, kind of, the impact on brand equity, and then on the other hand, like cost savings that you can do. And I think you mentioned something that really resonated with me in also like one of the past talks that you've given, that marketing automation actually kind of ends up giving people focus to focus on things where they have impact, like talking to customers, working on collaboration, innovate, all these kind of things, rather than spending time on low end use cases, as you called it, like that don't make economic sense. And I think that's something that we always try to do, also when we try to analyze it. But maybe we also have to think about what an iteration on that could be to really define ROI. Yeah, from a Martech standpoint of view. Another
Yeah,
part was basically, I guess, people moving towards a more remote setting, right? And it was also maybe not so much, let's see if you want to have something in place anymore. And it quickly turned into, we need to have something in place because otherwise we cannot run business anymore. So how have you perceived that development?
yeah. Well, I mean, this whole past year and a half, I mean, it's such a mix of like emotions around
Mm,
it, right? I mean, obviously, this pandemic has just been, created such crisis in so many contexts throughout the world that, I mean, definitely, it's still hard to look at it and not feel like, oh my God, the world would have been a much better place had none of that happened.
absolutely.
Um, you know, but at the same time, you recognize that when all these companies got put in this really strenuous position where basically the only way they could engage with their customers and the only way they could like have their workforce continue to be active was to do it remotely through digital experiences. I don't know, here's the way I would phrase this is we have spent years with companies talking about digital transformation to the
Mm,
point that it almost has become a cliche. And I talked to so many companies that they had their digital transformation plan, and it was like this 5 year, 10 year, like, oh, okay, well, yes, we will eventually someday be a fully digital company, and by 2030, you know, and I think that was both frustrating because it felt like it should move faster, but it's the same time I heard this from so many different companies that I'd almost fallen into a mode of thinking, well, I guess this is just the pace of change. There's a ceiling to
mm.
how quickly things can change, and maybe we have found that ceiling. But when the pandemic basically forced all of these companies, just purely as an act of survival, to change, the number of companies who actually like rose to that challenge is incredible. I mean, I just have so much admiration for how quickly so many companies were able to adapt to this new environment.
Mm.
And I mean, there's been so many people who provided stats on this, but I mean, more or less, you see in survey after survey and data point after data point that about like 5, 6, 7, 8 years worth of digital transformation got compressed and actually delivered in like a 1 year time period. And while the circumstances sucked and none of us would ever want to relive that
Yeah.
again, I think we do have to take a moment to appreciate that this was actually a step function up, in the digital maturity of just almost every industry. And I, I don't want to use the phrase "the new normal," but I think we've raised the minimum level of digital maturity across the industry, and I think collectively, as we come out of this pandemic era, everyone's going to be the better off for that. Like, we will build on this new foundation.
Cool. Scott, I would love to also look at a little bit more about brand and HubSpot's brand and how everything developed. So let's maybe switch slightly topic, but I would love to hear from you. What does brand actually mean for you personally? Because we have like a ton of definitions, and I think the more guests we have on this podcast, the more also like rich the definition gets. But what does it mean for you personally?
I think the definition that I've heard years ago as the catalyst for so much of the change in marketing, what really stuck with me was brand is what customers think of you.
And also something that we repeat again and again, and I think it's so true. How would you then describe HubSpot's brand in that way? I mean, you've been with the company for several years, but you have also seen the company before. Maybe that has also changed over time. How would you see and describe HubSpot's brand?
Yeah, I was always a fan of HubSpot's brand before joining them. Again, they're kind of, one of those early pioneers, in the Martech industry. And I think one of the things they did early on to win in that market was they put as much emphasis, perhaps even more emphasis, on the education of the audience, more so than just the software functionality. The whole creation of this inbound methodology, and then they developed the HubSpot Academy. But even just going to their, blogs, it was just such a focus on this recognition that the world is changing. Businesses, professionals, they're trying to figure out, how do we succeed in this new environment? And HubSpot really led by saying, "Listen, we'll show you how. We'll teach you, and we'll provide you software for that too. But even if you didn't buy HubSpot software, you could actually learn a ton from HubSpot, and still just get this incredible benefit." And I feel like that has always been the foundation of HubSpot's brand. Is it's very much about helping professionals and companies learn how to be successful in this new environment, and then have the software be a supporting set of capabilities for delivering on.
And I would 100% agree also from my personal experience. I think my first touch point before we even thought about buying HubSpot was maybe 10 years before the process started and all the great content around inbound marketing. And then I think it's slightly shifted towards all systems grow and help the business grow every day or to grow better every day. How have you experienced that pivot? Was it a tricky one for HubSpot? Have you heard like maybe the inbound marketing terminology a little bit too long internally, and you needed help people also internally move away from that slightly? Of course, maybe they still coexist, but how have you experienced that shift? Because I think that's something that companies actually need to do on a regular basis. Brands evolve, repositionings happen. A company that is static and doesn't evolve might not be in the market anymore pretty soon. So how have you experienced that as a HubSpot?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Is my impression is that HubSpot has really found the stable foundation underneath of this, which is, if we are in the business of helping these personas, these professionals, learn whatever the next new thing is that they need to learn to be successful in these roles with marketing and sales and customer success, that is a stable underlying mission that is going to be consistent for as far into the future as any of us can see. That, let's be the champion, for helping those professionals grow. these specific, frameworks and ideas and tactics and capabilities, they just continue to evolve. And I think HubSpot is, just sort of moving away from trying to say like, oh, well, there's, one specific tactic or one specific framework that, magically solves all of it. I think it's more of a recognition that, depending on the business you're in, the stage you're at, the maturity of your organization. I mean, there's just different ways of succeeding at that stage of what you're doing, and we'd like to provide you the education and tools to do that. So I think that's sort of why you see that whole like shift to positioning of like grow better, more so than just like inbound marketing is like, yes, everybody wants to grow better, and I love that phrase. It's like not just like grow in like some sort of like, oh, there's revenue, like we want our revenue to grow. But it's like, no, how do we grow? How do we become more realized in what we do? And I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit too touchy-feely on this, but this resonates with me just because as a student of Martech in this environment where it's just this constant change and constant innovation happening, I almost feel like learning has become the superpower that like underpins pretty much everything else we're doing.
And I guess for HubSpot to grow, like, of course, one of the critical aspects are the ecosystem, building up an ecosystem where everyone plugs in. You mentioned before, I guess, a landscape and these two landscapes only exist and have value when they're interconnected. However, this comes with a challenge on evolving brand. It comes with the challenge on how do you make sure partners represent your values as much as you do or as you would like them to do. Is the HubSpot brand maybe perceived through a partner's lens and their customers? So how do you see that? Like, it could be a chance, right, on advocates and all this amplification through partners, but then on the other hand, that challenge. How do you and HubSpot navigate that situation?
Yeah, it's very much, you're absolutely right. I mean, a successful ecosystem, I think, holds and amplifies the values of the platform around which that ecosystem is built. And so, one of the people on my team, who's managed, our marketplace and our partner program, like has been such a staunch advocate from day one of making sure that, listen, partners provide the transparency in their pricing. They meet the requirements of, compliance, laws as they're changing. I mean, like, there's lots of cases where people want to, promote and sell things in our ecosystem that, they start to fall into that gray area of things like, I'm not sure customers should be doing that. They can get themselves in trouble, and I think it's just, you have to have confidence that the value of the ecosystem, like the product itself, is very much creating a brand that customers trust, and if the ecosystem has that trust, then everyone in the ecosystem wins. I mean, HubSpot wins with it, but also all of the other companies who are participating in our ecosystem win because customers feel that like, oh, well, if something's been certified by HubSpot and I, get it from this marketplace, I can have high confidence that this will be a good addition. But you have to defend that. You have to protect that. And I feel like HubSpot, both at the level above me and then also the team that works, with me, like have just been remarkably committed to making sure that above everything else, let's make sure that people can trust what's in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And again, I just saw from an outside-in perspective, for me, was also like the content strategy, the academy, but then also that partner directory that really gave me the confidence HubSpot is the platform that we want to use specifically. So I agree that the trust element is a huge one here. I have one additional question that might be very easy for you to answer, actually. We have listeners that are well-established enterprises that are listed on exchanges, etc. But then on the other hand, we might also have listeners that are just starting off their company. And nowadays is actually like a pretty good and exciting time, as you said, with all the tools that we have at hand. But maybe a very practical advice for our listeners. How should they approach that evaluation? How should they start building up their tech stack? How should they reevaluate it, maybe even after a couple of times? Like what are pitfalls that you have seen in the past?
Yeah, so I think my overarching advice, and then we can get a little bit more specific. My overarching advice is to plan for change, because the one thing we know for a fact is this digital environment in which we're all operating is going to keep changing. There are going to be different things we are going to want to do 2 years from now, 5 years from now, that we can't even imagine. Right? Someone's going to come up with some next new social network thing. I don't know if it's going to be the metaverse or, but all of a sudden there'll be something really new and really cool, and we'll want to be able to very quickly, engage, in that channel or that experience. And so when you're designing your MarTech capabilities, I think it's worth investing effort in making sure that it's designed to adapt, it's designed to evolve. And so what this means is having a very strong bias towards openness in the solutions you select. These days where vendors can play these sort of lock-in games where they're basically siloing the data and you don't have access to it, and like your ability to get to things or manage them through APIs. I just there was a dark time in the history of software where those strategies ran rampant, in some very large enterprise software companies. And I just think the market doesn't have patience for that anymore. We want to have control over our own destiny. That being said, you should evaluate, vendors through how open they are, and then I think from a tech stack architecture perspective, and I will disclaim I'm highly biased in this regard, but I think you start by picking a platform. You say okay, this is going to be the tent pole around which we want to build our stack. And for all the other things that we might layer into this, our one common requirement is the data has to be shared back to the common platform. There has to be that ability that if we want pull data, we can pull it from that common platform. That, it is okay to have specialist tools and have, certain teams within your organization who pick their particular tools to do their particular job, with excellence. I think you want that sort of freedom and flexibility. But in order for there to be a coherent strategy, a coherent set of capabilities for your entire marketing org, in fact, even more broadly, just your entire, business, you really need to make sure that those other tools are participating as good citizens in whatever platform you've decided is going to be the foundation for your business.
So what kind of trends do you see Martech in 2022 and maybe even beyond? Like what keeps you awake at night?
Yes. So I would say it's less about a category. In fact, almost every category on that Martech landscape, like every year, there are just so many new innovations that happen. My favorite example is actually content management systems, for the web. So you could make the argument that content management systems are the oldest category in MarTech. Say maybe like spreadsheets if we want to go that far. All right. It's been 25 years, of content management platforms. If ever there was going to be a category that you would say, well, surely after 25 years, this should be done. It should be mature. It's boiled down to one or two options. Move on, right? Oh my goodness, the whole CMS, DXP, headless CMS. That space is just on fire. There is so much innovation happening there that if the oldest category in MarTech can still today be one of the hottest categories, in innovation, then I think, it gives you an appreciation that, the whole field is actually still quite open. Um, but that being said, to me, when I think of the trends now, it's less about there being like a net new category, so much as it feels like there's these approaches or underlying technical capabilities that just are proliferating, pervasive in every category. And those two that come to mind are certainly like AI and machine learning. Just continues to advance, and it's hard to find a Martech product now that doesn't leverage some degree of machine learning. I think we're just going to continue to see more and more innovation there. Like this whole new wave, if you follow the stuff that's been coming out of that OpenAI group, like GPT-3 and things. It's just like now it's not just like machine learning in the sense of being able to do pattern recognitions and predictions and things like that. Now we're starting to leverage more and more of these, AI engines for like generative AI and being able to like create content and video. It's getting into some really magical things. And then that also relates to another technological trend, which is what people very broadly call no code. And to me, no code isn't just about, oh, I can build a app that previously I would have had to write something in JavaScript to build. There are plenty of those tools, but to me, no code is much broader than that. It's basically this taking of capability that previously used to require an expert, whether it was a software engineer or a graphic designer or like a data scientist, these things that were only accessible if you had that expertise, that we're taking more and more of those use cases and we're now making them accessible to general business users, general marketers who, again, we can't do all the advanced stuff. There's still plenty of room for data scientists and software engineers and graphic designers. There are no risk of going out of business anytime soon. But there's all these like small self-service use cases that before a lot of it just didn't even get done because we couldn't justify or get the time of the experts to do this little thing. And now that we can use these sort of no-code paradigms to do more and more of this ourselves, I see that proliferating all throughout the Martech landscape right now. And well, it's a little bit of a buzzword. There's a real enablement, empowerment that is behind that I think it's still early. It's going to be fantastic to see what you as a marketer are going to be able to do at your fingertips in these next few years. It's going to be incredible.
Thanks so much, Scott. I think we could really see your passion about the topic. It really sparked inspiration on my side. I'm quite sure it also did for our listeners. So thanks for all the insights at this point already. Do you have anything last, like something that we should have talked about or a takeaway that you want to give to our listeners wherever they are right now? Anything that they should hear as kind of a closing remark from your side as well?
I think I close with an antidote to everything I just said, which is there's so much changing. And if you feel overwhelmed by all these changes, I assure you, you are not alone. Basically, everyone I know, I feel overwhelmed by it. I'm like, wow, I didn't know about this. This is, it's definitely worth taking a deep breath and realizing none of us have this completely figured out. We are just in a period of time where it's just going to be constant learning and no one's going to learn it all, and so I think to just continually stay focused on what really matters to our customers, and with the lens of what matters to our customers, what can I learn today about how to do that better, about how to serve them better? And I think if you just keep that open line and try not to get too distracted and overwhelmed by all the things that are happening out there, take a deep breath and be at peace. It's a wonderful time to be in marketing.
I'm glad we're not alone. Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate it again. Thanks for your time. And thanks for everyone listening to the podcast. Speak soon. Bye.